There's the bay. We're going to be shooting off to the left side of it.
A U.S. cargo plane attempts a difficult landing at the American naval base in Guantánamo Bay.
Where's the strobe?
Right over there.
It must avoid flying into restricted Cuban airspace.
We were intimidated by the fact there might be guards at the fence perimeter with guns.
Everybody told us, they'll shoot you down, they'll shoot you down.
What the hell?
We heard an explosion. It was pretty devastating.
NTSB investigators want to find out why a DC-8 crashed so close to the Cuban border.
To destroy a DC-8 like that, there had to be a high-energy impact.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are starting our approach.
We lost both engines.
Keep the mask over your nose. Emergency descent.
Brace for impact!
I think I lost one. Investigation started. He's gonna crash!
Guantánamo Bay, an isolated U.S. Navy training base on the southeastern edge of the communist island of Cuba. Assistant Fire Chief Frank Krupa and some trainee firefighters prepare for a practice drill.
All right, let's get at it.
A typical duty day, like many fire stations, you're there training and staying prepared for the alarm to strike. We heard an explosion, enough to shake the building. I didn't see the fireball at the end of the runway.
Let's go, let's go, let's go!
We knew something was wrong and headed for our truck. We knew that around 5 o'clock we were going to have a DC-8 landing.
Let's go, let's go, let's go!
The DC-8 was a cargo plane. Typically, there would be 3 people on board. This type of aircraft was going to have quite a bit of fuel on board.
The DC-8 cargo jet has crashed a quarter-mile in front of the runway.
As I headed down the runway, I was passing parts of the aircraft before I even reached the crash site itself. It was pretty devastating. I didn't expect to be survivors.
Debris is scattered over a wide area. But something catches Krupa's eye. Incredibly, part of the aircraft is still intact.
I realized that this was the cockpit, the forward section of the aircraft, which had broken away from the main fuselage. And I decided to walk over and see what I could see. It was the cockpit had been inverted. It was heavily damaged.
Help!
To Krupa's astonishment, he hears signs of life.
Help!
I heard these cries for help.
Help! Hello? Anybody? Help! Help!
Through the aircraft, I could hear the moans of personnel inside and realized that someone had survived.
We've got survivors.
I got on the radio and I told them to leave their vehicle and come over, and we had survivors. We needed to begin rescue.
Krupa clears a path into the damaged cockpit.
And there was a small hole at the bottom of the cockpit.
Okay, guys. We're gonna get you out of there. Just hang on. Hurry!
He discovers 3 people in the cockpit, all alive, but just barely.
Get out of here!
They were all seriously injured, a lot of traumatic injury, and they were crying and moaning.
Please, help! Please!
They are First Officer Thomas Curran, Flight Engineer David Richmond, and Captain James Chapo.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact moment of hitting the ground, no. Yeah, we were fortunate, you know. The DC-8, they say, was built to separate at the cockpit and cabin bulkhead. And sure enough, that's where it busted apart. And we rolled ahead of the airplane.
Tom, I'm here, Jim. Can you move? Yeah.
My memory of the actual accident itself is gone.
Please, help us.
I was told when the airplane hit the ground, a large boulder came through the cockpit by my rudder pedals and broke off the rudder pedals and severely damaged my legs.
The impact and fire have obliterated the DC-8. The 3 surviving pilots are flown to a hospital in Miami.
We found out later that the State Department had contacted the Cuban government and received special permission to medevac these crew members right across Cuban airspace to save time to get them to Miami.
Within hours of the accident, a team of investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board is on its way to the naval base.
We got notified that there was an airplane crash down in Guantánamo Bay.
The Guantánamo Bay Naval Base has been in U.S. hands since 1903. The base stayed under American control even after the Communist Revolution in 1959. Given the tensions between the countries, did Cuba play a role in the crash?
All right, let's see what we got.
Greg Fife is the lead investigator for the NTSB team. He knows that the crashed cargo plane is a DC-8 operated by a U.S. carrier.
It was operated by American International Airways, which is actually owned by a company called Connie Coletta, Inc. The aircraft was operating as flight number 808.
Fife is shocked by the extent of the destruction.
It's always a devastating sight when you see this magnificent machine spread out in pieces.
He wonders why a DC-8 on approach crashes 450 yards short of the runway.
Here, take a look at that.
The investigators examine the wreckage for clues that could explain why the aircraft came down so violently.
We need to check the engine, wings, ailerons, rudder. Get on it. Both black boxes coming in.
As they search the debris, investigators recover the 2 black boxes.
No, both slightly damaged.
One of the key tools for investigators for large transport category airplanes is the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder.
Coming to you right now.
The investigators send the boxes to the NTSB lab in Washington, D.C. for analysis.
Check the entire site, correct, yeah.
We want to know what the actual performance of the airplane was. And we can marry it up against the cockpit voice recorder to see what the crew was talking about, what they were looking at, if there was a problem.
While they wait for the black box data, the investigators interview witnesses to understand what happened to Flight 808.
So you saw the whole thing?
Yeah, I watched him come in.
They learn that the pilots of a U.S. Navy transport watched the plane's final moments.
Here it comes. On 10.
They were near the runway when Flight 808 began its approach.
We were fortunate there was a C-130 crew, so you have some qualified pilots who are actually watching this airplane, the DC-8, as it was trying to land on runway 10.
The DC-8 was turning toward the runway when something went wrong.
They described that when they watched the airplane as it turned towards runway 10, the bank angle continuously increased.
He's not gonna make it. No way.
U.S. Navy pilots watching Flight 808's landing approach fear they're witnessing a disaster in the making.
Come on, come on, come on. Level off, man. Level off.
Normally, you don't want to be turning more than about 10, 20 degrees on final approach. They watched this airplane as it went from 30 degrees to 40 degrees to 50 degrees, 60 degrees, and they were really surprised. And then they saw the wings go about 90 degrees relative to the horizon. The nose pitched down and the airplane struck the ground.
Sounds like a wing stall.
Yes, sir. It sure looked like it.
Yeah.
What the pilot describes sounds like a condition known as aerodynamic stall, where the wings aren't producing the lift needed to keep the plane in the air.
So you now have the dynamic. You understand how the aircraft struck the ground. Now you have to determine why.
The investigators wonder if the air traffic controller who handled Flight 808 can shed any light on the crash.
There was a controller trainee at the time. That trainee was the one that was talking to the crew of Flight 808.
So did you pick up anything unusual in your conversation with the pilots?
Everything seemed fine.
Guantánamo, this is Connie 808.
Connie 808, Guantánamo, go ahead.
Well, except for one thing.
What was that?
Faith learns that 12 minutes before the crash, the crew radioed in an unusual request as they were approaching the island.
Connie 808 requesting, we'd like to make the approach for 10 this afternoon.
Connie 808, understand you'd like runway 10?
That's affirmative, runway 10.
That change wasn't unusual.
The controller typically will allow the crew to make the decision as to what runway. And that runway selection sometimes is based on wind conditions or certain types of weather conditions or possibly even airspace restrictions.
Guantánamo has a single runway with aircraft landing in either direction, identified as 28 from the east and 10 from the west. Flight 808 was originally scheduled to land on runway 28.
Normally, airplanes land on runway 28. It's more or less a straight-in approach, landing to the west.
But then the crew requested a switch to runway 10. That approach is closer to the border with Cuba. To avoid Cuban territory, landing aircraft are forced to approach from the sea and then make a sharp turn onto runway 10.
You only have 3/4 of a mile from the border fence, so trying to manipulate or maneuver a DC-8 is a real challenge.
The aircraft has to approach almost perpendicular to the runway, and when they get in close, they have to make a hard starboard turn. They have to turn and dip and drop onto the runway.
Faith is puzzled. Why would the crew of Flight 808 choose the more difficult approach?
Did they say why they wanted to land on 10?
I think it caught her attention that why would you do that when everybody else lands on runway 28, which is the easiest approach?
The investigators want to interview the 3 pilots of Flight 808 about the crash, but they are still in intensive care, and they remember little about the accident.
We know that anytime there's a surviving crew member or crew members, there's always the possibility that they aren't going to remember exactly what was transpiring because of their traumatic injuries.
Even though the surviving crew can't offer any insight into why they flew a more challenging approach,
Thanks very much.
the investigators are determined to learn more about what happened. They wonder about the role the pilots played in the accident. Were they qualified to fly the DC-8?
Let's have a look here.
Faith studies the crew's personnel files. He learns that the captain, James Chapo, is a highly experienced pilot with over 20,000 hours of flight time under his belt.
Weather's looking pretty good.
Yeah, not bad.
20,000 hours is a very experienced pilot, and this captain had a good reputation. Other pilots had talked about the fact that, you know, he was very dynamic, he was a good communicator.
Is there anywhere to get a bite to eat on the base?
Just the chow hall, unfortunately.
First Officer Thomas Curran is a former Navy pilot.
He had a first officer who, again, was very experienced, 15,000 plus hours.
The flight engineer, Dave Richmond, is also a seasoned pilot.
These guys had to know what they were doing. Doesn't make any sense.
Fife wonders why an experienced crew allowed the aircraft to get into such a severe bank.
From an accident investigation standpoint, when you have tens of thousands of hours between these three pilots, you know that they can operate the airplane. So now the question is, why didn't they? How come they weren't able to use that experience to successfully land this airplane?
It just doesn't add up. Fife and the investigative team take a step back and review the crash scene. They know the crew was highly qualified and decide to look into whether there was something wrong with the plane.
Let's bring it up, please.
An investigator is always keeping an open mind. We're somewhat inherently suspicious people, and consequently, I'll look at a lot of different theories, but I'm not going to exclude anything until I know for fact that it couldn't be that.
Now, Fife finally has access to the plane's critical digital flight data. He uses that data to recreate the exact flight path of the plane.
When we looked at the flight path study, we had to understand what the dynamics of that flight was, and then see how the crew was handling flying this approach.
Okay, so far, so good.
The NTSB team reviews the plane's flight path.
Okay, let's see the proper approach. So they started their turn too late and never recovered.
The botched turn meant the crew had to take the aircraft into a steeper and steeper bank in order to get it aligned with the runway.
The pilot increased the bank, trying to salvage that turn and get the airplane lined up.
But the steep bank was reducing the plane's ability to stay airborne.
When you bank the airplane to 45 or 60 degrees, the amount of lift it's producing to hold the airplane in the air is compromised because the wings are not pointed up there at this high angle.
Now all of a sudden the airplane gets into an aerodynamic stall at a time that you don't expect it. And because you're low to the ground, you don't have sufficient altitude for proper recovery.
The simulation has left the investigators with urgent new questions.
Why did they start that turn so late?
Fife also needs to know why the crew didn't abandon an approach that was clearly going wrong.
It was kind of surprising for all of us that you would be maneuvering an airplane of that size, that low to the ground.
The cockpit voice recording is finally ready. It's Fife's last hope for solving the mystery. The team gets a breakthrough when they listen to the recording.
Okay, let's get started.
We didn't hold a lot of hope out for getting good information from the flight crew. That's why the cockpit voice recorder became so important to us, because it could fill in the gaps.
And what it reveals is extraordinary.
Connie 808, you're required to remain within the airspace designated by a strobe light.
Roger, we'll look for the strobe light, Connie 808.
Fife hears the air traffic controller discussing a strobe light with the crew of Flight 808.
So what do we know about this strobe they keep talking about?
They study a navigational chart for the Guantánamo airport.
There it is.
They learn that a strobe light marks the base's border fence with Cuba.
On the approach to runway 10, there are certain visual cues that the crew would use in order to get themselves lined up so that they wouldn't overfly the restricted airspace. One of those cues was a high-intensity strobe light that was mounted along the border fence.
Are they giving us 28? Yeah, if it's available.
The investigators hear the crew talking about using the easier runway 28 for the landing.
They had initially lined up for 28, and that was to be their landing runway.
So why did they switch to 10?
How to make that 10 approach?
Just for the heck of it and see how it is. If we miss it, we'll just come back around and land on 28.
Okay.
Stop the tape. For the heck of it? That's why he's landing on runway 10?
Fife is struck by the captain's decision to use runway 10.
When there was a comment by the captain going, why don't we just try runway 10 just for, I think, the heck of it, you know? I mean, you don't just do things for the heck of it in an airplane of that size. I think that caught us by surprise.
The investigators learned that neither pilot had ever landed a DC-8 at Guantánamo. They wonder if the captain knew that runway 10 was a more challenging approach than runway 28. They study the airline's procedures.
They had to watch a video. That's it.
Because of the difficulty landing at Guantánamo, military pilots require special training to land on runway 10. But the cargo airline only required its civilian pilots to watch a short video.
Exercise extreme caution when landing on runway 10.
Records show the captain and first officer had both watched the training video within the past year.
Align your base leg just to the right of the strobe beacon. This beacon identifies the U.S.-Cuban boundary beginning at the shoreline.
Landing on runway 10 was very unique. That's why the airport was classified as a special use airport, because it takes specialized training.
Let's keep going.
The investigators now know why the crew chose runway 10. But why didn't they abandon their disastrous approach?
There's the airport straight ahead.
Huh?
Fife learns that as Flight 808 approaches Guantánamo, Captain Chapo is having a problem getting a visual fix on the airport.
There's the bay. We're going to be shooting off to the left side of it.
The airport's going to be on that side of the bay.
We're gonna come back around and hang it right.
Yeah, that's right.
The crew repeatedly has to explain its location to him.
Before they actually started the final portions of the approach to the runway, they were having problems trying to find the airport.
Wonder if that's the airport right there, straight ahead of us.
That is the airport straight ahead of us.
Like the crew members, the investigators now wonder.
What's wrong with this guy?
Wonder if that's the airport right there straight ahead of us. That is the airport straight ahead of us.
Captain seems out of it.
The investigators listening to Flight 808's cockpit voice recording can't understand why the pilots continued their ill-advised approach, instead of going around and landing on the other, easier end of the runway.
You're at 1,400 feet. You want to get all dirty and slow down and everything?
Oh, I will, yeah.
The first officer tells the captain they're low enough to extend their flaps and gear, which will slow the plane for the approach.
I remember as we were approaching the shoreline, We were intimidated by the fact that we were told that there might be guards at the fence perimeter with guns.
To avoid Cuban airspace on the left, the plane must make a tight right turn.
The runway's right there, man.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, I got it. We're gonna have to really honk it. Let's get the gear down.
All right.
Curran and Richmond seem increasingly anxious as they remind the captain to get the aircraft ready to land.
The dynamic in the cockpit changed, but as they started to get into this high-stress, high-anxiety situation...
Slow. Airspeed.
The airplane was getting slower. It was in a very high drag condition, appropriate for landing, but it requires a lot of power.
But strangely, the captain ignores the warning to speed up.
Slow. Airspeed. You should be talking about doing a go-around.
This captain found himself in a position where he ended up trying to salvage a bad situation when he should have abandoned the approach.
Where's the strobe?
Right over there.
Where?
Right over there.
Where?
The captain can't locate the strobe light that marks the Cuban border.
Because everybody told us, you know, they'll shoot you down, they'll shoot you down.
You know, we're not getting our airspeed back there.
The flight engineer notices that the plane is still flying more than 10 knots too slow.
Where's the strobe?
Right down there.
I still don't see it.
Instead of increasing his airspeed, the captain keeps trying to find the strobe light.
It was a clear indication that the airspeed was below what the flight engineer felt was acceptable. And the captain was still fixated with trying to find that strobe light.
I still don't see it.
He's obsessed with that strobe.
All of a sudden, you lose the first officer and the flight engineer in the conversation, and now the captain's basically dominating. He's become autonomous in that cockpit, where I'm gonna do this, we're gonna do this, I'm trying to find the strobe.
Oh, hell. We're never gonna make this.
Huh?
Flight engineer Richmond sees the DC-8 isn't properly positioned for the landing.
Do you think you're gonna make this?
Yeah. If I can catch the strobe light.
First Officer Curran is also concerned.
The first officer and the flight engineer, they only challenged the captain by what I call hinting and hoping, where they would throw out a suggestion. Do you think we're gonna make this?
Yeah, if I can catch that strobe light. Yeah, if I can catch that strobe light.
But Captain Chapo isn't taking the hint.
So now that crew has now split apart into 3 autonomous pilots, and 2 of which don't like what's going on, but never voice an opinion as to why they don't like it, and we got to do something else.
The DC-8 begins its critical final turn. But Captain Chapo still can't see the runway. He realizes he must have begun the turn too late. To compensate, he makes the turn even steeper.
It was about double what airline passengers would experience in a routine passenger flight. Maximums normally around 30 degrees. This was going to require something near 60 degrees to be able to make the airplane turn quickly enough, and they're going to do it at low altitude.
The plane needs an airspeed of 147 knots to stay airborne in the tight turn.
Watch. Keep your airspeed up.
The flight engineer is probably the one that has the largest picture view of what's going on. If somebody said, we're not going to make this, that would be a clear red flag warning.
140.
They need another 7 knots of speed. Suddenly, the flight computer activates a stick shaker warning.
55-degree bank. You get a stick shaker.
It's a warning that shakes the control column to notify a pilot of an imminent stall.
Stall warning.
I got it. Stall warning! Stall warning!
I remember the stall warning. And everybody put their hands on the throttles and pushed the throttles up to full blast.
Max power! I got it! Back off!
There was a delay of several seconds before the power went up, but we were only about 350 feet when the airplane stalled, so there was only a couple of seconds to recover anyway.
There we go! No! No! There we go! No! No!
He completely tuned out his crew.
The investigators are struck by the captain's peculiar behavior, his hostility, his fixation on the strobe, and the way he ignored his crew's warnings.
We knew that there was some bad decision-making going on in this particular cockpit. We knew that there were some attitudes that had started to come out during the latter portions of the approach. We knew that communication had broken down, and the question was why.
This new evidence turns the focus back on the pilots of Flight 808. The team will need to look beyond the crew's stellar track record to see what they can uncover.
Okay, let's find everything we can out about these guys.
Greg Feith studies the duty rosters and pilot logbooks of the DC-8 cargo plane's crew, searching for clues about the three pilots' behavior prior to the crash.
What have we here?
As part of looking at the performance of the flight crew, we typically do a 72-hour look back at the crew. What have they been doing in the last 72 hours? So you look at their time off, you see when they came on duty, you see what kind of flying they had done just prior to the accident.
Feith learns that the day before the crash, the crew started flying from Dallas-Fort Worth at midnight and flew all night. They crossed the country before arriving back at their Atlanta base just before 8 a.m.
It's called the backside of the clock flying. That is flying at night, which the typical cargo haulers do.
The Atlanta airport was supposed to be the end of the crew's shift, but they were called back for one last flight.
Guantánamo Bay, here we come.
Nothing more I'd rather do.
I can think of a few things.
By this point, the crew members have been awake for about 15 hours each. In the last 48 hours, Captain Shapo has had only 7 hours of sleep.
I was not particularly enthusiastic to go out for another 7-8 hours of flying. I'd much rather have gone home and get a good night's sleep and a home meal.
The new flight headed to Virginia to pick up cargo that included submarine parts.
They wanted us to go to Norfolk and then go to Guantánamo Bay, unload, and then fly back to Atlanta.
Could the lengthy duty time have impaired the pilot's performance to the point that they crashed their plane?
It's real easy to write it off as pilot error, saying they screwed up, they didn't maintain airspeed, they stalled the airplane, they crashed the airplane. But that doesn't tell us the whole story.
The investigators asked NASA for help in analyzing the sleep patterns of the DC-8 crew.
Thanks for helping out with this.
Mark Rosekind leads that effort. He's the head of NASA's Fatigue Countermeasures Program.
We knew that fatigue was a risk, so we knew bad stuff was already going on in flight. The key was, how do you demonstrate fatigue actually played a role in that crash?
Rosekind calculates how many hours of sleep the crew had in the few days leading up to the accident. He discovers that the pilot's long workday wasn't the only reason they would have been tired.
They were all sleep deprived.
The crew also experienced an accumulated lack of sleep, or sleep debt, from the 2 night shifts before the crash.
Gear up. Tom.
Yep. Got it.
What most people don't realize is that when you lose sleep, it actually builds into what's called a sleep debt. And you should think about that just like a bank account. It's like going in the red.
Captain Cheapo's sleep debt was large. He had only 15 hours of sleep in the previous 3 days. Magnifying the effect of fatigue and sleep debt were the crew's biological clocks, known as circadian rhythms.
We actually have a clock in our brain, and that body clock controls everything on a 24-hour basis. So as soon as humans alter that pattern, like trying to work at night and then sleep during the day, you're basically opposing your biology to do that. There is a cost to it.
Flying at night and sleeping during the day was wreaking havoc on the crew's circadian rhythms.
Connie 808, understand you'd like runway 10?
That's affirmative. Runway 10.
Rosekind determines the effects of fatigue and sleep deprivation would be felt most intensely between 3 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when Flight 808 was approaching Guantánamo Bay.
Everything you are as a human is degraded or impaired in some way. Your memory, your decision-making, your vigilance, reaction time, your communication skills, you name it, every one of those things is degraded. And it's impaired potentially anywhere from 20 to 50%.
Again, and again, and again, and again.
Captain Cheapo especially was showing noticeable signs of fatigue.
One was what we call cognitive fixation. The captain just got stuck on finding a strobe light.
Where's the strobe?
Right over there.
Where?
And he kept saying, if I can just find the strobe light, if I can just find the strobe light.
Oh, hell. We're never gonna make this.
Huh?
All 3 pilots were suffering from the cumulative impact of fatigue. A very long shift.
Do you think you're gonna make this?
Sleep debt.
Yeah.
And disrupted circadian rhythms.
Even one of them could have put him at risk, but it was the whole crew, really, that was suffering from fatigue at the time of the accident.
What investigators have uncovered raises a disturbing question. Why did a sleep-deprived crew suffering from fatigue accept the last-minute flight to Guantanamo? After the crew's lengthy recovery in the hospital, the NTSB investigators interview the captain, first officer, and flight engineer. Finally, the team will get a chance to hear from the men inside the cockpit.
I was tired. We were all tired.
You didn't have to accept the flight.
Technically, no, but we didn't really have a choice.
If you had an objection to taking a trip, you could be in for a little bit of a conversation with the boss. So we decided we'll take the trip.
The cargo industry is notorious as being a cutthroat industry. They will push the crews routinely to the edge of duty time limits. So there's this constant feel of almost a military type, we've got to get this done, philosophy that becomes the corporate culture.
So now you have pilots who think the same way. I'll do whatever it takes to make things happen. Why? Because there's this fear of intimidation and the loss of a job that if you don't do it, I'll find somebody that will.
That fear of losing a job may have led the crew to disaster.
Stall warning.
I got it. Stall warning. Stall warning. Max power. I got it. Back off. There it goes.
At the very end, things happened very rapidly. We were too low, and our reactions were too slow.
And I should have turned it over to Tom, but I was already just sort of out of it.
It still gets to me because it still boils down to the captain. You know, the captain made a mistake, and that's a hard thing to live with all the time.
The investigators discover one final tragic piece of the puzzle. The strobe Captain Chapo spent so much time looking for wasn't even working that day. And no one had told the controller that the strobe was down.
She never told them that it was inoperative.
Where's the strobe?
So now they're trying to find something that doesn't exist. And when they saw something flash out there, which they thought was the strobe, it was actually the tin roof on a little cabana. They assumed that that was the strobe.
In his final report on the crash of Flight 808, Greg Feith emphasizes the central role played by fatigue.
This accident that happened in Guantánamo Bay with this flight crew was precedent-setting. It was the first commercial aviation accident caused by fatigue. Not fatigue contributing to the accident, but actually caused by fatigue. And the industry took notice.
A quarter century after the accident, Captain Jim Chapo and First Officer Tom Curran finally meet the man who brought them out of the wreckage, firefighter Frank Krupa, who was decorated for his work that day.
Hang on. Just hang on. Help us, please. Get us out of here, please.
I know these old guys.
I mean, thank you so much for it.
So you're the man.
Well, I'm one of them. I'm representing the crew.
Right.
Yes, it was the worst aircraft crash I've been on, but the guys survived. And
despite losing his right leg, First Officer Tom Curran went back to flying and eventually joined the NTSB as an investigator.
I live with considerable discomfort, so every time I take a step, I remember it. But you have to shunt things to the side. You can either decide to go forward, or you can hibernate, retire to oblivion. That's not my type A personality.
Captain Jim Chapo suffered back injuries in the crash and never returned to commercial flying.
You know, I think about those things a lot, and I would want people to realize it can happen to them. If you're fatigued, call it in and just stick with it.
Flight engineer David Richmond, who was badly injured, regained his health and went on to captain commercial cargo flights. In the aftermath of the Flight 808 crash, the Federal Aviation Administration tightens regulations on crew sleep requirements. The FAA also mandates airlines to take into account the latest sleep research as they manage pilot rest times.
Today we have much more scientifically bound crew duty time limits. As an industry, we're better about all of those today, but we can still improve, and we should.